Hi, hello, good morning. In today's video we're going to be talking about Lisa Eldridge's summer collection. It was just released last week and the collection features a brand new eyeshadow palette in the shade Desert Gleam and 3 new additions to the Rouge Experience lipstick line, 2 browns and a red. Now, I initially wasn't really planning to get anything from the collection, but the 2 brown lipsticks just had my name written so much all over them that as much and as hard as I tried to resist, I in the end succumbed to the desire to own them, even if I had the best intentions to forgo this collection. Now, without further rambling, I'm just going to explain to you how the video is going to work so that you have an idea what to expect. In the first part of the video, I'm actually going to talk about why I didn't purchase the Desert Gleam palette, because I always think it's really interesting to hear people's reasoning as to why they decided to not purchase something. It's not only important to hear why people purchase something, but also why they chose not to purchase something. So in the first portion of the video, I basically go over my reasoning to not purchasing the palette, and then I busted out some items from my existing Lisa Eldridge collection to create a look that doesn't necessarily dupe the Desert Gleam palette, but is sort of inspired by the vibes of that palette and creates a look that is possibly even more suited to my personal aesthetic compared to what is found in the Desert Gleam palette. And then of course I will be back to show you the 2 lipsticks. I will show you lip swatches, I will show you some lip comparison swatches to possibly somewhat similar lipsticks in Lisa Eldridge's collection, and we're just going to talk about the 2 new colors, Toasted and Ray. But for now I'm just going to leave you with the portion of the video where I explain why I didn't purchase the Desert Gleam palette. At the time of filming this part of the video, my lipsticks haven't actually arrived yet. So I am going to complete this look with one of my other Lisa Eldridge Rouge Experience lipsticks, and I'm going to come back and show you Ray and Toasted, and we're going to talk all about them in the second portion of this video. But for now, I actually wanted to talk about the Desert Gleam palette and my reasoning behind not purchasing the palette, and I'm also going to do a look that is sort of inspired by this palette but more in the tones that I personally prefer, and I'll just share with you all of my reasons why I didn't purchase it, just in case that's helpful to some of you who are still debating whether or not to get the palette. The first reason I didn't purchase the palette is a very irrational one, and it basically comes down to I didn't feel that rush in my belly when I saw this palette to purchase it. I did feel that for the lipsticks, but not for a second did I look at the Desert Gleam palette and think, this must be mine. And that's not always 100% indicative of what's going to happen once I see other people using a product, because sometimes I will see other people using the product and then I will become convinced that it is something that I would really enjoy and I will end up purchasing it. But in this specific case, I've actually seen several people use it, including Lisa Eldridge herself, and you know what a fool I am for this woman. She could sell me, my used up ribbon lipstick for twice the price that I bought it for. That's how much of an influence she has on me. Even she was not able to get me to buy the Desert Gleam palette, and I have several reasons for that. Now, I've busted out here my Sorcery palette and my Fawn palette, and you may already have noticed that something doesn't look quite right, and that is because I swapped the blue shade from the Sorcery palette with a brown from the Fawn palette. So my blue from the Sorcery palette is now housed in my Fawn palette because I just love this neutral color story with a pop of blue, and I was really missing a brown in my Sorcery palette, so this configuration makes me much happier. But now let's take the irrational out of the equation and talk about the rational reasons why I didn't purchase the palette. So let's break it down. The Desert Gleam palette has 2 browns, and by the looks of it, one is sort of like a sandy camel peach toned brown, and the deeper brown is a neutral toned, very beautiful brown. But as it is, I already have quite a few browns between Fawn, actually mostly in Fawn. I was going to say between Fawn and Sorcery, but of course Sorcery doesn't really have a brown. But Fawn has so much brown in it, and already in tones that I actually prefer compared to the Desert Gleam palette. So for instance, we have this shade here, which is this like sort of lighter transition type matte shade, which I think is much more my personal preference, or not that it's much more my personal preference. I don't mind the tones in the brown that are present in Desert Gleam, but I just think I prefer this a little bit more because it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit maybe less peach toned, and I just prefer it. For the deeper brown shade, we once again have several options, and looking at these palettes, I'm actually thinking that this one here, which is not really a matte, it's more of a satin, might be the one that comes closest. So I'm going to swatch that next to that. So between these 2 shades, I already have within my Lisa Eldridge collection even the two browns that cover all of my hopes and desires. Then there is a khaki light green matte shade. Truth be told, right now I can't think of an eyeshadow in my collection that is a one-on-one dupe for that. I do, however, have similar shades in my collection, and I have a very specific reason for not really feeling attracted to that shade. I did have a shade like this in actually a very similar color story. As it has been pointed out by several people, the Mini Gold palette from Natasha Denona actually had a very similar vibe to the color story, including and down to that matte green khaki eyeshadow. Lovely color, beautiful undertone, an undertone that I do enjoy in makeup. But realistically speaking, I don't have the Mini Gold palette from Natasha Denona anymore because I never used it. Because as much as I like the idea of that khaki green shade, I never actually used it, or I used it very rarely. I do prefer somewhat deeper, more olive-toned greens, so think of something like, let me show you. Think of something like this shade here from the Lancome Hypno Squint in the shade Bronze Absolute. Yes, this is absolutely not the same shade. It is a lot deeper, it is a lot more olive-toned, but it is actually much more my preference compared to that more mid-toned, lighter khaki. However, this is a deeper shade. I'm sure that for some people it's going to be a lot more intimidating. But for the way I construct my makeup looks, I think this is a more utilitarian shade for me. The Desert Gleam palette also has a bronze shade. I'm not going to even go through the trouble of finding a bronze shade in my collection because I'm sure I've got more than enough bronzes to satisfy all of my bronze needs. Then there is a gold shade, and let's be honest, I need a gold shade like I need a hole in the head. Between the Natasha Denona Gold palette and my obnoxiously large Pat McGrath Labs collection, I've got gold coming out of all of my bodily cavities. I've got gold that I can bequeath to my posterity, and then my posterity will still have enough gold to bequeath to their posterity. So I do not need more gold. Initially in the promo photos, the shade reminded much more of something like Gigabyte from Pat McGrath Labs, which already is a superior eyeshadow because it is in that beautiful hard gelée formula and it's much sparklier. However, upon closer inspection, the shade in the Desert Gleam palette really appears to be a gold. You know, gold is gold. I can grab the Natasha Denona Gold palette and immediately I think I have a gold that is probably, if not the same, at least very similar to the one that is present in the palette from Lisa Eldridge. The one eyeshadow that I'm sure most of us look at and think, oh, this is quite unique, I can't dupe it, is the shade that she describes as a mysterious silver with a green duochrome to it. Now granted, I can't come up with even an eyeshadow from my collection that is quite the same as the shade from Lisa Eldridge. One thing I don't like about the shade from Lisa Eldridge, the mysterious duochrome green appears to be much more gold. Like when I've seen people use it, that green shift tends to actually lean quite much more on the golden green side of things, and I would far have preferred if that shade is an actual green duochrome. Now, because I prefer it to be green, I actually already have a shade that is perfect for that purpose. And we've got this here, and yes, it is not the same shade, but for me this is perhaps even a better shade because I know and I love this shade. This is the shade Sinful from the Decadence palette. Is it the same? No, it is not, but it satisfies all of my needs. I don't really need this to be more silver because I know that in theory it looks like a very unique shade, but in practice I think it's the kind of shade that I would really struggle to incorporate in looks and I would really not enjoy as much. So for all of these considerations, I decided to forgo the Desert Gleam palette. So instead I figured it would be much more fun to do a look with my existing Lisa Eldridge collection, where I'm going to use some of the browns from the Fawn palette, and I'm actually going to use the shade Madrigal here from the Sorcery palette, which is much more the type of green that I prefer. It is a sparkling metallic sort of golden green shade, and I think this is much more my preference because this is exactly the type of metallic green that I love. So my plan was to actually just do a look focusing around these three shades over here. I did want to only use the Lisa Eldridge eyeshadow palettes that I have, just so we can also talk briefly about the formula, but I thought like a nice neutral look with this metallic green would be something that sort of dupes the vibes of the Desert Gleam palette. Alright, I've zoomed you in and we're going to get started on the eye look. I'm going to grab a fluffy blending brush. I'm going to go into this mid-tone brown shade, and perhaps this is also a good place to mention once again that I personally very much enjoy the matte eyeshadow formula from Lisa Eldridge, but with that said, I do not think that this is going to be everyone's favorite eyeshadow formula. The matte eyeshadows from Lisa Eldridge are that classic more cream to powder type formula, which lends itself more onto a cream than it really does onto a powder. So you will not see that much powder kick up when you put your brush in there, like for example you would if you were to use a YSL matte. I think the two have a very similar effect on the lid in the sense that they're both very blurring, very flattering on the skin, but because of that more powdery finish of the YSL formula, I think some people will find it easier to pick up and blend, because the eyeshadow formula from Lisa Eldridge, being this creamy, requires a little bit of building up, and depending on the type of brush that you're using, you might even find it difficult to transfer from your pan onto your lids. I highly recommend using natural bristles and not synthetic bristles, because I do think you're going to struggle if you're trying to use this formula with synthetic bristles. If I had to think of similar eyeshadow formulas across the market, immediately what comes to mind is the matte eyeshadows from Lancome. So the Lancome Hypnose Squints, the mattes in there have a very similar formula to the ones from Lisa Eldridge, not surprisingly given that Lisa is the creative director from Lancome. And I also think Prada mattes, same story. Next I'm going to use a somewhat smaller crease brush, and I'm going to dip into the deeper brown that I swatched earlier, and I'm going to apply that in the outer portion of my eyelids, right here, just to intensify the outer corner. The reason I enjoy this formula is precisely this. You see how dark this eyeshadow is in the pan, but when you start applying it, you have the liberty to decide to what extent you want it to be really this dark. You can continue deepening it up until you get that kind of pigmentation, but you may also leave it to be a little bit softer, and that is the reason I personally really enjoy this formula. The flexibility that it gives me to do whatever I want. I don't have to watch myself to not be too heavy-handed, because that is the issue with a more powdery formula. If you're a little bit more heavy-handed, you could pack a punch as soon as you lay your brush onto your skin. Whereas with a formula like this, you have to work to build up the pigment, which may be very frustrating for you. I find it a real perk of this formula. I'm going to apply a little bit of glitter glue before I apply the shade Madrigal. Also applying a little bit in my inner corners. Taking Madrigal on my finger and applying that all over the eyelid. This eyeshadow is simply stunning. Just gorgeous. Sometimes spending that extra few minutes with your own collection can really cure you of all sorts of desires to buy new makeup. In saying that, I bought brown lipsticks that I probably didn't need. But you know, something's gotta give. For my inner corners, I think I'm actually going to apply a little bit of the topper shade here from the Fawn palette. It's a sparkly, sort of like white silvery type topper. It's not really silver, it's more like a transparent whitish type color. And I think that's going to be the perfect highlight for this look. And perhaps just to lean a little bit into that, you know, combination of gold and silver that Lisa seems to have in that Desert Gleam palette, I'm actually going to apply a few sparkles from this over top of Madrigal. Just a few. And finally, going to grab the Fawn palette again, and this lighter brown matte shade, I'm going to run that on the lower lashes. Let's do sparkle moment, why not? So here is a look with my existing Lisa Eldridge collection, which I think fits my personal aesthetic a little bit better than the Desert Gleam collection does. I did actually add a little fun twist to the look. I decided to go for the Burnt Umber mascara from Eldridge because I figured that would add a fun little twist and also a little bit of warmth to the look, because I think the look turned out quite neutral to perhaps even leaning a bit more on the cooler side of things. Since I don't have Ray and Toasted yet, I'm wearing another one of the Rouge Experience lipsticks, one of my favorites. This is the shade Ashes of Roses. Perfectly completes this look. Absolutely love how this look turned out. I hope that this was somewhat helpful to you, or at least some of you who are still on the fence of purchasing or not the Desert Gleam palette. Something perhaps very important to add to the conversation: this is not a limited edition palette, so you don't have to go out and buy it ASAP. It's not like the Betty palette where you might have experienced a little bit of FOMO just by the fact that it was a very limited edition release. And now I'm handing over to future Mariam, who will be showing you Toasted and Ray. Have fun! Okay, now that you've seen the individual swatches of the two lipsticks on my face without any eye makeup, I decided that that's probably the best way for you to be able to appreciate the colors without being distracted too much by the eyeshadow that I have on my eyelids, which, by the way, if anyone was curious, today is the Vega palette. And of course, as you probably guessed, I already have a Ray on my lips because obviously, or well, not obviously, but if you knew anything about me, you would know that that is the color that I was really the most excited about, because when I saw this lipstick, I thought, finally, we're getting the Rouge Experience version of the shade Decade. So now with that, I think we can proceed to the next portion of the video, which is going to be some comparison swatches with existing lip shades in Eldridge's collection. And for your convenience, I've also lip swatched all of them. So I will insert little videos, side-by-side videos, where you're going to see the new lipstick compared to some of the existing shades. And I also have everything swatched on the back of my hand here so that we can discuss the colors a little bit more in detail as we go through them. So let's start off with the shade Toasted over here. This is a swatch for the shade Toasted. And next to that, I have swatched some of the lipsticks that you're also going to see swatched on my lips side by side. Now, the first lipstick that immediately popped into my head as a, somewhat more sheer formula, and one that I consider to be a little bit more on the nude side, is this one here. This is from the Luxuriously Lucent line, and this is the shade La Mépris. And as you can see, the two lipsticks are actually quite different from each other. As you can also see from the lip swatch, Toasted is actually quite a neutral slash cool leaning brown. She describes it as a milky tea, like a true milky tea beige, and I couldn't agree more with that description. That is actually a very apt description of this color. By comparison, La Mépris is much peachier and much more nude in tone. And for example, while I think I can absolutely rock the shade Toasted, La Mépris by itself is just a little too light for me, and it kind of washes me out. And I actually purchased it more as like a not really like a topper, but more like a balmy lipstick that I can apply over some of the mattes in order to make them a bit creamier. So I didn't actually purchase this lipstick to even use on its own. The next lipstick I wanted to compare to is the shade Muse over here. As you can see, Muse, of course, being in the velvet line, is a lot more pigmented. It has a lot more like a base color to it, but it is also quite much rosier. And I think you can also clearly see on the lips that while the two lipsticks both reside in like the nude territory of lipsticks, Toasted is clearly like a neutral cool brown, whereas Muse really is a rosy brown. It's a beautiful color, but nothing similar to Toasted. Now, I actually don't own a lot of the other really nude velvet lipsticks from Eldridge, so for comparison swatches for those, you're going to have to resort to a different channel. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the shade Fawn, which of course I don't have. So this is where my Eldridge comparisons are going to stop. I only have one lipstick that is not from Eldridge that I really wanted to compare, because I thought it might be quite similar, but actually at least on the swatch on the back of my hand, they look quite different. I think on the lips maybe it's a bit harder to tell the difference. But this here is the shade Eliza Sand from the Gucci Neutrals line. So this is also a lipstick that is in a satin formula, and I also consider it to be like a beigey brown on my lips. I think once it's on my lips, it interacts with the undertones of my lips and it makes it appear possibly slightly more comparable to Toasted. I still think Toasted has a somewhat cooler vibe to it, but I think on the lips the two are probably the closest that I personally have in my collection. And maybe in between swatching Toasted and Ray, we can briefly discuss the Rouge Experience lipstick formula if you've never experienced that lipstick formula before. And I didn't show you the component because I think by now it's no secret how that looks like, but just in case you've missed it, this is how the Rouge Experience lipsticks from Lisa Eldridge come. They come in a refillable component that you can also personalize with your initials etched here onto the bottom of the component. It's really beautiful and very hefty looking, and you can just pop out the refills and pop them back in. Obviously I just bought refills for Toasted and Ray, and then this is how the lipsticks look like. The best way to describe these lipsticks, if you have any, you know, prior background with Lisa Eldridge formulas, I would say these are a marriage between her lip balms and her velvet mattes. I wouldn't actually describe them as somewhere between a lucent and like a luxuriously lucent and a velvet, because to me the luxuriously lucent lipsticks have a somewhat different feel on the lips, whereas if you've tried her balms, you will know exactly what I mean when I say that these are like a much more pigmented balm that has more staying power. Because her balms, I have the shade Epanouie here. They're really nice, but they are not very long lasting. They're very comfortable, they're very nourishing on the lips, but unfortunately they have absolutely no lasting power. So as much as I like the comfort level of this formula, I wasn't super huge on the lasting power, and I don't think it was meant to be a very lasting lipstick. But I did really like the feel of it on my lips, and I think the Rouge Experience line gives you that feel on the lips, but with the extra pigment level and with the extra lasting power. I find these lipsticks to stay really well on the lips. I find them quite comfortable to wear, so overall I think it's a really lovely formula, especially if you've always wanted to try her velvet lipsticks, but you were afraid that matte lipsticks are going to dry out your lips, which I totally understand. Some people really cannot tolerate matte lipsticks. I don't really have a problem with her velvet mattes, and I can tell you I've worn a lot of matte lipsticks over the course of my makeup adventures, including the liquid mattes, which were all the rage in 2016. Absolutely hated those, absolutely hated that trend. I'm so happy that that trend is dead. But at the same time, I could see the appeal of those matte lipsticks and their staying power, and I think Lisa Eldridge did an absolutely fantastic job when she introduced the velvet mattes. So to me the velvet mattes are possibly one of the most comfortable mattes that I've ever tried. Luxury brands have really caught up onto the lipstick game, so now there's really a range of formulas on the market, including matte formulas, which are very comfortable on the lips. But I personally am a huge fan of the velvet mattes. But if you weren't and you thought they were really drying, I think you're really going to like the Rouge Experience lipsticks. And with that, let's segue to comparison swatches of the shade Ray. So this right here is a swatch on the back of my hand for the shade Ray, and of course I know what you were thinking, because I was thinking the same as soon as I saw this lipstick. Is this similar to our beloved and now discontinued Velvet Decade? So here is a swatch right next to that, to Velvet Decade. And what I can tell you is that on the back of my hand it appears that there is a little bit more of like a purpley mahogany tone almost to the shade Velvet Decade. Obviously a different formula, so much more pigmented, much more punchy. But once they are on my lips, I think they look like, you know, first cousins. Maybe not siblings, but definitely first cousins, because I think on my lips the two really look like very similar colors except for the pigmentation levels. So I'm curious what you guys thought, especially once you saw the comparison like lip swatches next to each other, whether the two lipsticks are similar. But for me they're similar enough for my needs to be completely satisfied. Now I had also busted the shade Painterly here from the Luxuriously Lucent line, because once I saw the shade Ray I thought, oh, maybe they look somewhat similar, but once you see them on the lips and also on the swatch on the back of my hand, you will realize they're quite different colors from each other. While they both give, you know, the vibes of a chocolate brown, I think there's a lot more red, as you can see in the shade Painterly, and of course because it's a lucent, there's a lot less pigmentation going on. And finally, last but certainly not least, we've got a comparison swatch here with the shade Meet Me in Berlin. And as you can see, Meet Me in Berlin here, also the luxuriously lucent formula, is also a really gorgeous, like grungy brown. And I think what distinguishes it from the shade Ray is that the shade Ray is more neutral and cooler in tone. And I think in terms of color, possibly one of the most important takeaways from this is that both Ray and Toasted are actually really cool in tone. In some pictures, you know, with the lighting, it almost appears as if maybe they're going to be a little bit on the warmer side, but on the lips and even on the, as a swatch on the back of my hand, you can see both colors are actually rather cool in tone, which I think is fantastic news for everyone who has always complained that Lisa Eldridge's lipsticks tend to lean quite warm. But at the same time, I'm very curious because lipsticks don't show up the same on people. I'm curious if you have a somewhat cooler tone, what did you think about Ray and Toasted? I personally really enjoy both lipsticks. I'm very happy that Toasted is the kind of beigey brown that I can absolutely wear without feeling like it's washing me out. I think it's going to be the perfect, you know, nude for a variety of like smokier type looks, or, you know, for just like chill days. And I think I'm pretty much going to wrap this video up because I have nothing additional to share. I think already it's going to be quite a long video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please do share your thoughts on everything that we discussed today, the reasons why I didn't purchase the Desert Gleam palette, and, you know, the two lipsticks. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Did you already get your lipsticks? Did you try them? What did you think about them? Did you buy the palette? What did you think about it? As usual, thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!